Bien, bonjour, j'ai le rappel pour les nouveaux venus que nous sommes aujourd'hui dans la deuxième journée d'un séminaire qui est la suite d'une recherche qui avait comme titre la construction du réel dans l'art contemporain, qui a commencé en 2004 et qui a été publié en 2008. Et avec Michael Fried et Luc Delahaye, nous commençons un nouveau cycle, donc pas des séminaires, un nouveau cycle des séminaires et un nouveau cycle de recherche autour d'une question similaire qui est liée à la première, mais qui porte plus précisément sur les temps de l'histoire, sur les temporalités de l'histoire. Et hier, Michael Fried a introduit un certain nombre de notions, de concepts, notamment celui très complexe de réalisme qu'il a développé à propos du réalisme de Courbet. Et aujourd'hui, il sera question plutôt du réalisme de Jeff Wall et des photographes qui sont dans ce livre, et du réalisme de Luc Delahaye. On va voir si c'est le terme qui me convient. En tout cas, je pense que par rapport à la première partie de notre recherche, il y a un élément déjà très important qui peut apporter sur la dimension de construction du tableau, construction de l'image, dans la relation entre cette construction et la position du spectateur, qui se produit quelque chose comme un réalisme, comme une saisie du réel. Et donc Michael Fried a mis en évidence que le rapport entre la pomme peinte sur le tableau et la vraie pomme n'était pas le lieu sur lequel mesurer le réalisme. Alors cela est d'autant plus valable pour la photographie dont on a souvent tendance à penser qu'elle suffit de la déclencher pour attraper quelque chose. En réalité, le problème c'est on saisit de moins en moins d'éléments du réel. C'est l'un des problèmes qui a été élaboré dans son propre travail photographique par Luc Delahaye, donc nous sommes très contents de le recevoir. Peut-être rappeler encore une fois, avant de passer la parole à Michael Fried, l'intitulé de ces groupes de recherche mixtes entre l'école des études en sciences sociales et l'école des Beaux-arts de Lyon, qui est art contemporain et temps de l'histoire. Donc, temps de l'histoire, ce n'est pas l'histoire au sens de la discipline historique, qui est une discipline qui implique des catégories, une certaine mise en ordre de l'histoire, un certain régime aussi de causalité et de faits. Ce qui nous intéresse à l'intérieur de cette dimension, c'est quelque chose de plus philosophique peut-être, qui tombe sous la notion de l'historicité. Donc l'appartenance à un certain temps, l'appartenance à une certaine condition. Et aujourd'hui, je pense qu'à travers le travail que Michael a fait sur un certain nombre de photographes à partir de la fin des années 80, et qui se retrouvent dans ces livres que je fais circuler parmi vous, Why Photography Matters as Art as Never Before. Il sera question de ça, de la question de présence plutôt que de représentation, de saisie de cette dimension des lettres-là, et aussi d'un certain nombre de dimensions de l'absence. Tout ceci est assez mystérieux dans ma bouche, mais va être beaucoup moins lorsque Michael Fried aura parlé. Mais en tout cas, nous allons traverser un certain nombre de problèmes qui sont proches de certaines, je pense, de vos préoccupations, d'une façon plus immédiate que pour la peinture de Courbet et celle de Caravage, des questions qui touchent à la notion de everyday, good or bad, everyday, depends. En tout cas, ou de banalité, ou toute une série d'éléments qui revient très souvent dans l'art contemporain. Donc un mot pour ceux qui n'étaient pas là hier, encore pour remercier Michael Fried. Michael Fried est professeur à Baltimore. 𝙩𝙤𝙢𝙥𝙯 Hopkins, il est traduit en français, la trilogie sur la place du spectateur, le réalisme de Courbet et le modernisme sont traduites par Gallimard. J'espère que cet ouvrage sur la photographie, qui est comme une proposition, comme tous les travaux de Michael Fried, très puissante et qui prête à discussion. Ce n'est pas du tout une synthèse, hein. Ce sont des lectures tout à fait inattendues. Moi, j'ai découvert beaucoup de choses sur ces photos qui me disaient rarement quelque chose. Là, elle commence à fonctionner un peu grâce à ces interprétations très, j'allais dire partisanes. Je pense que Michael Fried serait d'accord, c'est-à-dire qui adoptent un point de vue très arrêté. Donc, c'est un peu le retour de Michael Fried sur le terrain de l'art contemporain. Il n'a jamais abandonné vraiment, mais c'est dans les années 60, c'est continué tout le long de son travail d'historien de l'art dans une relation d'échange intellectuel mais aussi amical avec un certain nombre d'artistes majeurs, progressant à la lecture de ces livres que ces photographes sont devenus aussi des interlocuteurs importants. C'est le cas de la relation qui lie Michael Fried à 𝙩𝙤𝙢𝙥𝙨, qui nous a été donc introduit par lui. Et je pense que le mieux que j'ai à faire, c'est de lui laisser la parole pour présenter cette problématique autour de retour des questions que nous avons abordées hier, des questions de théâtralité, des questions d'antithéâtralité, de présence ou d'absence du spectateur, également l'absence ou la présence du spectateur, dans un domaine tout à fait autre, qui est celui de la peinture, mais dans lequel, d'après Michael Fried, ces problématiques reviennent en force. Et vous avez remarqué hier que pour Michael Fried, les générations d'artistes, les dates, ce qui vient avant et ce qui vient après a beaucoup de sens. Donc la théâtralité ou l'antithéâtralité sont toujours là depuis le XVIIIe siècle, mais elles prennent des formes historiques différentes et parfois cachées. Et c'est le cas de certaines de ces démarches de photographes. Donc pour la matinée, le programme, mais nous n'avons pas de programme jamais très strict, c'est d'avoir une introduction par Michael de ces problèmes traités dans ses livres, et puis Luc Delahaye va brièvement ou longuement, selon ce qu'il veut, nous montrer certains de ses travaux.
Non, pas brièvement, nous avons beaucoup de parler.
Non, pas brièvement, nous avons tout le temps. Donc, Bernard, tu veux rajouter quelque chose? Bernard ne veut pas rajouter quelque chose. Donc, je rappelle encore une fois pour ceux qui nous ont rejoints aujourd'hui que Michael parle en anglais, mais il est parfaitement en mesure de suivre les discussions en français, donc ne soyez pas timide.
Okay, thank you. So I brought in a bunch of slides of photographs, but suddenly with the computer here, and then with just thinking of this, the freedom of this situation. So it occurs to me, and I will be giving a lecture tomorrow, yes, which will be from the slides. So it occurs to me that we might as well use the fact that we have the computer for me to talk a little more freely and set a bigger context, okay? So, in the bigger context, I want to go back to, let's say, my own beginnings as an art critic, and also my commitment to where my commitments in contemporary art began, where they are grounded. All right? So I'm showing you a painting. I have no, I don't know what, it's very hard now to know what people, young artists, students, know anymore about, let's say, certain classic moments in high modernism, because there has been such a movement away from that, that the pictures themselves, for the time being, have disappeared from the museums. Right? No one wants to know about it. So I'm showing you a masterpiece, a 𝙩𝙪𝙨𝙪, okay, a great painting by a great painter who is at this moment in almost complete eclipse, not just in Europe, but in America. So Morris Louis. He's born in 1912. That's the same year as Pollock. Okay? De Kooning was born in 1904, Pollock in 1912, Pollock dies in 56, and Louis is born in 1912. But he is slower to get going than Pollock. I'm going to assume that people are familiar with the all-over drip paintings of Jackson Pollock. But do you want to see them? Okay, let's see. We can do this. We have the technology to do this. Okay. So, I don't know, it's okay as an image. I think it's probably number 1, 1948 in the Museum of Modern Art, but it doesn't matter exactly what it is. But Pollock, starting in the year 1947, right? Jackson Pollock remains to this day the most important painter, abstract painter of the modern period, right? You've got the earlier moment with Picasso and Miro and Mondrian and Matisse and so on. And then with the Second World War, and the action shifts to America. And there are a number of very significant painters who emerge, but the key painter is Pollock. And the key painter, I would say, the great painter to this day of a certain kind of radical abstraction, right, remains Pollock at this moment. The moment is 1947 to 1950. Okay? He has 3 years of making completely great painting. And then it becomes a problem for him what to do and where to go. And the paintings get less good, and he starts drinking more, and eventually he, in effect, kills himself by driving a car faster than a car can be driven when you're totally drunk. I mean, if you get totally drunk and you drive a car at 90 miles an hour, you don't do that forever. So, but these pictures are remarkable, and he made them by putting a canvas on the floor in his studio, unstretched canvas on the floor. And then he moves around the canvas with paint, that's right, dripping, pouring and dripping onto the canvas. And then when it's all done, the canvas is put on, it's stretched, right? And that's the picture. These pictures are called, let's say, part of them is, the way they're called is all over, all over. Right? And one impulse, one drive in modernist painting from Pollock, from Manet, actually it starts even with Courbet, Manet, Impressionism, Cézanne, is an increasing, I mean, we were talking yesterday about something I was calling facingness in Manet. Also in Manet's generation, they want a painting to frapper, to be striking. One major tendency that happens in modernist painting is the desire for the picture to have the same pressure everywhere, to be intense everywhere. Right? You could even say it's an impulse that has its own equivalent in poetry. You know, it's what Mallarmé is trying to do in the poetry, in the sonnets, is to make a poem that would be completely even pressure everywhere, including the spaces between the letters, including the spaces between the lines. But the very way the language works, right? He's not composing by rhythmic phrases à la Baudelaire. Right? Tel comme lui-même, enfin, l'éternité, le change. Right? Toc, 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 toc. The pressure is to be like that. And in the painting, there's this development. And Pollock finds a way, with these all-over drip paintings, of making a painting that's like that. I don't want to call that flatness. Do you see, the minute you sort of put it in terms of something like flatness, it becomes too formal. You could say it just too abstract a way of talking. I want you to think of it more, into, you know, and we would need the painting here for you to feel this, but it's this, it's what's happening right in front of you, right, that he wants. And these paintings were very, very, people were aware that they were remarkable in New York, but it was very hard to know, it was impossible for Pollock to figure out how to go on from them. It was not at all clear what, if anything, they were going to lead to. But in some ways, that was a problem that abstract painting presented to younger painters by 1950. There were other models for how painting could work. There was de Kooning and so on. I'm talking about New York. But how to go on from this was a real question. Up, I misspelled. Yes, that's what I want. Bon. So there's a young American painter, young woman, named Helen Frankenthaler. And when she was very young, still, she also was très liée avec le grand critique Clement Greenberg. And she intuited that the way to use Pollock, to go on from Pollock, was to open up, to simplify the texture of the painting, not to try to work with as much paint on the surface as he did. And this is a very crucial painting of hers, called Mountains and Sea, from October 1952. Like Pollock, she's working on bare canvas. Right? Bare canvas, which is to say, canvas that is completely absorbent. And she had already, this is a large picture, again, like Pollock. She was already a sort of beautiful watercolor painter. She was très douée. And she started to do a little bit of a certain kind of drawing on the canvas, but you can then see what she's doing. She's putting paint on it in thinned paint, thinned with the turpentine, and letting it blot into the canvas. So again, this was a very hard picture to see when she made it in '52. It didn't look like what anyone expected a painting to be, but it suddenly had all this space and light and air in it, and again with the color dispersed in these different ways. Frankenthaler is still alive, though she's very, very ill, but she's put together a magnificent oeuvre. Right? You don't hear about Frankenthaler for a number of reasons. But one reason is that she has never, how can I put it? She's never played the feminist card. She's never made a point about being a woman, she's just a painter. And that's just less interesting to journalism than if she'd made a point about being a woman. In In 1954, 53, some young painters, Morris Louis and Kenneth Noland, visited her studio. And what she was doing, they saw mountains and sea. That was in the studio. And it was a kind of revelation to them. It was a revelation about, I mean, the phrase that Noland uses, he said, in a way, she showed us what you could do with Pollock. She opened up a range of possibilities. And the possibilities they sensed were possibilities for color and for using the paint a certain way. And this is really the moment of the start of the use of acrylic paints, right? Not oil paints anymore, but acrylic-based, which gave a new range of color. It also dried very, very quickly. You had less of turpentine bleeding out into the canvas. They were just able to do things. This is a Louis from the late 1950s, and it's a very beautiful painting. It's called Saraband. And if you look, can you see what he's done? He's taken these pure, intense acrylic colors, and he stained them into plain canvas again, not sized, not primed, completely absorbent. And he's put these bright color shapes, not just next to each other, but partly overlapping, down there. And then, when it's all over, he put this last dark color over the whole thing. So again, you get this continuous fabric of the canvas and the color, with all of that internal figuration, something like shapes, but at the same time, like the overall line in Pollock, the shapes don't make a kind of figure versus a ground. You're getting something like shape, at the same time you're getting this very powerful continuity. Can you see that? And that's, again, do you see how much, again, this picture is even more, you could say even more conspicuously than the Pollock, all about the spread of the paint and the color and the canvas, the weave of it, all like that. Again, it's not flatness. It's something like, well, the term I like to use is something like presentness, right? Present, not présence, not présence. Présence, pour moi, il y a quelque chose théâtral. There's a quality that I want to call the opposite of présence, which is presentness. I don't know how you would do that in French. But again, it's the gesture I keep wanting to make is this, the idea of a kind of absolute visual pressure, intensity, right up across the whole picture. You're looking at a picture that's maybe 12 feet wide. I mean, these are big pictures. Very, very intense. Okay, for me, as a young critic, right, so this was 1958. I didn't know this when it was made in 58, but I learned about it very soon afterwards. And for me, Lewis was and has always been a great painter. I organized the first retrospective of Lewis's work in America in 1966, 67. And I saw, when I was in my 20s, I went out, I saw every single picture he ever made, a lot of them, before they were stretched. But I'm showing you this so that you can, well, let me show you then. So this comes, he initially starts with a series of paintings that are called veils, just as a general term. This comes near the end of the veils. Oh, sorry, I'm clicking too fast. No, let's go for this. This is what we were starting out with, but I don't know why it's not. Okay, good. And then he moves to another series and makes, well, 150, about 150 it says. And he calls these unfurled. Again, this is like 14 feet wide. Right? It's a big picture. It's not as big as Courbet's Burial. Right? Courbet's Burial is 22 feet wide. You can make a bigger picture with the human figure than you can do with abstraction. Okay? The human figure gives you a module, and you can make it as big as the enterrement or as big as Veronese or whatever. I think an unfurled, I think 14 feet seems to be about as big as an abstract painting can get and maintain intensity. Right? You stretch it out bigger and it gets it starts, it's as if the pressure goes a little bit. Okay? So the unfurleds are almost at the limit. I would say they're at the limit of possibility for abstract painting to completely sustain. But that's bare canvas with these rivulets of intense acrylic color, right? Dripped like that. It's my private belief that Mallarmé would have loved these pictures. Okay? He would have looked at these pictures, he would have said, that's it. That's what I've always wanted in painting. Right? This blankness, this whiteness of the page, and then these incredible rivulets of color. And when you're in front of one of these pictures, you have to see it as a whole. Right? It's not a picture that's constructed in pieces and parts. Again, that's part of what all of this art has about it. It's this integral thing that exerts this extraordinary pressure. And for me, with the unfurled, it's as if the way the picture works is as if it just went like this, in front of me. As if the rivulets of color, as if they just moved out to the side and are spreading the canvas, the picture field, in front of you. So the effect is of kind of incredible, as it were, an instantaneousness, but the instantaneousness of the making present of the picture. Okay. So the reason I'm showing you this is I'm saying this is where I begin. Okay, this is where my commitments begin. Part of my luck as a young critic, part of my, just the historical luck of beginning when I began, where I began, wasn't just my luck, it was the general luck of the moment, is I want to say there was this absolutely great new radical painting happening, not just in the world, but very, very nearby, in New York. Though Lewis lived not in New York, he lived in Washington, D.C. He didn't come to New York often. But he makes these, you know, astonishing pictures, to me, astonishing pictures. Eventually, he will make, he wanted to try to make smaller pictures, and he made stripes. And then he dies very young. I mean, he dies and at the age of 49, he's not yet 50, of lung cancer, partly because we now know that the chemicals he was working with, the acrylic, the thinner that he was using for the acrylics, was dangerous stuff. And he was working amazingly in a quite small room in a house in suburban Washington. And he smoked, but everyone then smoked. But I even noticed people smoking in France, you know, today. But he's breathing these terrible fumes, and he dies. So it's a very short career. But again, the other thing I want you to notice is just how the intensity of the color. Right? One reason that's worth stressing is that starting around 1970, everywhere, part of the effect of minimalism is that there has been a war against color. Right? Color is proscribed. Right? Color has almost gone out of art, painting, sculpture, and so on. Everything is supposed to be some version of white or gray. This is not sufficiently recognized, but color is still banned. It's like a political thing. It's if you make paintings with very intense color, they will not get shown. Okay, practically. So let Lewis stand as the painter. I never knew Lewis. Oh yeah, right. Sorry, I mistyped again. Yeah. I never knew Lewis. After I graduated from college, I spent a few years in England, and Lewis died just about the same moment that I returned. But I then knew the painting, and I got very involved. But from a very early date, I became very close to, friends with, and in fact just saw earlier last week in London, the British sculptor Anthony Caro, C-A-R-O. Caro today is 85 years old. À mon avis, he's the best sculptor in the universe, okay? He has been the best sculptor in the universe since 1960. Well, for 5 years he shared that distinction with David Smith. And then David Smith died, and there's Caro. This is the first sculpture of his I saw. It's called Midday. He made it in 1960. And when I walked for the first time into the courtyard of his house in London, I was 22 years old in the fall of 1961, this sculpture was sitting there. And for me, it was entirely like getting hit with lightning. I just saw this, and I felt I was seeing one of the great works of art that I had ever seen, and something completely new to me. And Caro has worked in a number of ways, but basically what we're seeing is he's working in steel, like Smith, welded and bolted, and then in this case, painted. The essence of his art, so the other thing I want to somehow emphasize is I grow up with abstract art. What I'm at home with from the very beginning of my work, even before I'm a critic, but just looking, is abstraction. Right? Abstraction is I just keep wanting to say it's what I was at home with from the beginning. When I'm looking at abstraction, I don't have to think. Okay, abstraction is for me the natural way for art to be. Okay? So, and all the work that I've done on Courbet and Manet and Caravaggio and so on and so forth, in a way, what makes that possible is representation is something I have to think about. So I don't see representational art necessarily as normal. I see it always as special. Abstraction feels to me normal. This would be the natural way for things to work, right? And that has, that's been helpful for thinking about representational work. What Caro's art is all about is relationships, right? His genius is to be able to take this and attach it to that and put it next to that and figure out, and get it so that it is something new that you have to take in as a whole, and where the relationships are not at all obvious, not at all evident. So, for example, with this sculpture, I ask, it's at the Museum of Modern Art now. It's in the sculpture garden of the Museum of Modern Art. Okay. I hate sculpture gardens. I think they're horrible. I think they're funest. Right? They're like graveyards for sculptures, where sculptures go to die. They go to sculpture gardens. But nevertheless, you can go see this there. And it's all about something like a kind of contained movement within the sculpture. You've got this tilted thing which makes you aware of the horizontality of the ground, but then there's this different kind of horizon within the piece. And then the I-beam at this end that's parallel to it, but then he takes that other I-beam and he stands it on an edge and he turns it. And the effect is almost like some kind of dancer, turning as you watch. And then at the end of it, this upright, and so you have to imagine almost a movement that goes like that. And then at the top of that, this further thing that goes back, it's as if he's found a way of, he's got this movement that goes up, and then how could you once you're going up, how could you make a movement that was even more that than that? And the answer is that, okay? Something like that. And all of these things working with each other, this kind of intervals. So the piece, and you're looking at something again, you have to see it in its entirety as a whole with these abstract relationships that are, to me, like endlessly gripping and powerful. So I'm showing you, what I won't go on like this, but I'm saying, take Lewis, take Caro, right? These are great, great artists. great works of this moment of high modernism. Okay. Think of high modernism as something that begins around the time of Pollock in the 1940s, Rothko, Newman, Clifford Still, right? Frankenthaler, Lewis, Kenneth Nolan, Jules Olitsky in painting, David Smith, Caro in sculpture. It's an incredible flowering, right? Incredible flowering at that from 40s, 50s on into the 60s in American art. And Caro is British, but he also went back and forth between England and America. In England he was, and to this day, the English are very nervous about Caro. England has never liked abstract art. England doesn't see abstract art. England's very literary in its tastes. So Caro is still to this day, at the age of 85, suspicious there. So Caro's natural home was America, and he would come there every year and work there. But Oop. Yeah, hold on. In the course of around the middle of the 1960s, a counter-movement arises in America again. It comes in some ways out of high modernism, but it turns out to be very, very different. Right? And it's minimalism. Right? Lewis is not a minimalist. Caro is not a minimalist. The key minimalists are Tony Smith, and you're looking at Tony Smith's iconic work called 𝙩𝙬𝙦. It's a 6-foot steel cube. Okay? Tony Smith, Don Judd, Robert Morris, Carl Andre. In some ways, the quintessential minimalist work is 𝙩𝙬𝙦. I mean, you can, if you just take midday over here and 𝙩𝙬 over there, you've got it, right? This is absolute war between two different ways of thinking about art, making art, imagining art. Carl Andre. So this would be 144, probably steel, slightly Corten steel, slightly rusted steel squares, each one sort of like that, laid out on the floor of the gallery to make that kind of pattern. Okay. This again would be a classic minimalist work. Mid-1960s, late 1960s. And then there's the writings of Judd and Morris and Tony Smith. What's minimalism about? Okay, so this is happening at the same moment. You've got paintings by Lewis and Nolan and Olitsky and sculptures by Caro, and then the minimalism. As a critic, as a young critic going around and seeing this, I felt right away this was something very different. And I disapproved. it'd be too simple to say I didn't like it, because it's impossible not to like this. Or you walk into a white gallery space, and you've got these 144 steel squares put down on the floor of the gallery. Maybe there might be, a little bit nearer us, there might be 144 stainless steel squares put down. So this is rusted Corten steel, and then there would be it looks beautiful. It looks great. You can't not like what it looks like. And it looks wonderful in the space. But I want to say art, making real art, is not essentially about making something that looks nice. Right? You can always make something that looks nice. You can make something that looks terrific. But that doesn't make it a good sculpture. Right? That doesn't mean that it's convincing as a sculpture. And for me, minimalism was all involved in making something that looked irresistible. And then there was a further thing. And you can see it in this André, but they wrote about it. The artists themselves wrote about it. The point wasn't, when you're looking at a Lewis unfurled, right, like the Alpha Phi that we looked at, all the meaning of the work is in the work. Right? What matters is just that painting and what happens in that painting. Put it another way, the painting doesn't care whether you're looking at it or not. Okay? It is a matter of complete indifference to Lewis's Alpha Phi, whether you're there or not. It could care less. It is what it is. Midday. All the relationships that matter are in midday. Midday doesn't care whether you're there or you're not there. The whole point of minimalism, of work like this, was for you to enter into this space in the gallery, to see the work, to start experiencing, and that would be the word they use, experiencing the work in relation to the walls, in relation to the lighting, in relation to yourself and even your sense of your body. So Merleau-Ponty phenomenology was actually important to the minimalist artists. And then you walk around the piece, you walk around the space. With the Carl Andres, you were even allowed to walk on the sculpture if you wanted to. They had a natural tendency not to, but you could. And the whole point of this art was your real-time, present tense experience as an embodied person, as in a certain sense you performed the sculpture in the situation. As Robert Morris says at one point in his writing, he says, the point about this isn't that the object, and they called these works objects, the object doesn't become less important exactly, but it becomes less self-important. It's just one factor among others in a total situation. And the situation is the gallery space, the white walls, the lighting, the floor, and the viewer, the person, the spectateur. But now, not exactly a spectator, almost like the performer of the piece, as he, she moves through the space and so on. For me, again, as a young critic, trying this just felt to me, it was a very important challenge to high modernism. This stress on each viewer's incommensurable experience. And if Giovanni does this, that's his experience. I do it, it's my experience. Luke does it, and there's no question. You can't say, well, who had a better experience? Right? Who was right about the piece? Right? It's complete, in that sense, completely subjective. You want to say art is subjective, but in fact, art is and isn't subjective. This is designed to be completely subjective. The experience, you have your experience, that's it. I want to say with something like the unfurled or the carol, Yeah, of course, your access to it is through a kind of intuition, your experience. But the point is to see the work right, to see what's really there. Here, it's about constructing a situation that becomes the basis for a kind of personal, private, subjective performance of the work. This seemed to me, the term I used was, and this was before I really had read Diderot, theatrical, théâtral. I didn't know the French at that point, but theatrical. Against the presentness and the intense relationality of high modernism, there was this situational, theatrical art, and I opposed it. I was against it. And I wrote this essay called Art and Objecthood, which in 1967, which is against it. So these are the terms of opposition that got developed. And then when I started to do art history, as Giovanni mentioned yesterday, and went back to this moment of the middle of the 18th century, Chardin, Greuze, David, with Diderot right there, I discovered that for Diderot too, as it were, the theatrical was the enemy, and that there was this whole tradition that I was, when I wrote Art and Objecthood, when I opposed something like this, I was a kind of Diderotian critic without knowing it. À mon insu. Okay? So that's the framework for this. Now, the other thing that has to be said is, insofar as there was then a kind of war between high modernism and minimalism, between abstraction and theatricality, between me and all of this stuff, high modernism and abstraction and I completely lost. Okay? Minimalism and théâtralité win completely, right? And that's what we've had. Right? We've had 30 or 40 years of théâtralité à outrance, okay? Partout. Okay? If penguins were making art at the South Pole, it would be théâtral. Right? That's what they would want to do. They'd be reading the art magazines and they would make théâtral art. Right? Almost. So, after this moment, right, I found myself writing much less about contemporary art because I would have been like repeating myself, right? I said what I needed to say in Art and Objecthood, and I started to do the historical work. I remained very close to certain artists. So, for example, Caro is someone over the years I've seen continually and spend time with him in the studio and so on. And there are other painters and sculptors I'm extremely involved with, and I can say more about that. But I was doing the art history. And I was unaware for a long time of something that other people were aware of, and that was photography. So, and what should I say, okay? So, all this while, extremely interesting and good and important photography is going on. And I know a tiny bit about it while it's happening. I mean, in the 1960s and 70s. The 60s and 70s would be a time, let's say, when there was very important what's called street photography. Right? people going out and using a Leica, shooting in black and white in the street, catching informal things as they're happening. Cartier-Bresson would be the epitome of this, trying to find surprising, instantaneous compositions and so on. But around the late 1970s, around 1980, something else starts to happen. It begins even earlier, in a way, but you could take sort of three photographers, and they kind of exemplify what I'm talking about. And they don't know each other, they're separated. And one of them is Jeff Wall. And you're looking at Wall's, what he wants to call his first photograph. Right? The Destroyed Room from 1978. This is a light box, right? You're familiar with his work. It's a large transparency, lit from behind by fluorescent lights. This is a scene that he completely constructed in the studio, right? He made this artificial room, and he lets you see when you look at the photo. It's obvious that it's constructed. When you look at this, as you study it and you see the sort of doorway at the left and the window, you're aware that this is not like a real room. It's something he set up and then created the scene of something like creative destruction, and then there are all sorts of items on the floor. It's a big picture, right? Yeah, we'll turn down the light a little bit. And it's constructed, right? There's no question of like going out and just discovering this in the world. This is a deliberate artistic construction. Let me see if I can, if I can get something here. Maybe this. Okay, it's not exactly what I was looking for. Give me another second here. How do I get to the right? Can we? Yeah, I mean, I want to sort of see what is it on?
Okay.
Oh, good. Oh, I see. Yeah, but it's not. No, I don't have what I want. All right, I'll tell you what. Let's put that on the. I can't, yeah, we'll put up.
Maybe it's faster if we...
I just don't think they're giving us exactly what I want.
No.
It's not exactly, no, it's a little later.
Yeah, it's hard to find.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
Let's see, we can just...
Must be somewhere.
So I shut the... How can I... Ah, bon. I'll sharpen the focus a little bit. Is that the correct way? Can you check whether, is it correct left and right? Okay. Let me just...
No, no, it's
No. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So this is a French photographer, Jean-Marc Bustamante, Bustamante. So at the same moment, right, Jeff Wall is doing this, making this strange new kind of photography in Vancouver, right, the west coast of Canada. In France, Bustamante, the same year, 78, who has been working as an assistant in Paris to the American photographer William Klein, who is a kind of street photographer and is shooting black and white, again, probably with a Leica, and printing these photographs in a very aggressive, high contrast, black and white way. Bustamante must be about 30 then. He takes an 8x10 view camera, a completely different kind of piece of equipment. You know, a Leica is this beautiful little machine, right? This fantastic invention. 35mm film, you can go click, 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 click. Suddenly he takes an 8x10 viewfinder camera, which you have to mount on a tripod, right? And you have to frame your scene, and you get under a thing, and you have an inverted image, and you compose it, and you take your photograph. And he sticks it in a car, and he drives through southern France and northern Spain, and he makes a series of photographs like this, in color, and he then prints them as large as he can then print them. Okay? Jeff Wall is making photographs again at this moment large. Bustamante makes them as large as he can make them. In additions, as far as I can figure out, of one. He then frames them flush to the photograph in a mahogany kind of dark brown wood frame, and he calls them tableaux. This is a very characteristic one of these early tableaux. I think Bustamante is extremely interesting. I mean, very important. I think the early work is, like this, remarkable. It's remarkable because it is artistically so clear, too, about what it's about. I hope you can sort of see this, but even though we have this unfinished road going into the picture, and even though we have these tire tracks in the foreground of the picture, we are absolutely not invited to enter the scene. The photograph is very much about, it's here, you could say it has a certain presentness, but it also has a very high degree of resistance. It wants to keep you at a distance. It wants to create a certain effect of what I want to call exclusion. It's a new kind of desire for the photograph. Put it another way, well, just so you see this. So suddenly you've got Wall in Vancouver, you've got Bustamante in France, making these things as large as he can, framed a certain way, called tableau, keeping the viewer out of the picture. And at the same moment, there's this extremely interesting situation developing in Germany. Merci. photographer in this case is then a young German guy named Thomas Ruff, R-U-F-F. Dusseldorf turns out to be, again, this is one of the wonderful things about art, is you never know where something's going to happen. Right? So who would have imagined in the immediate wake of the Second World War that the most important art school in the world would turn out to be in Dusseldorf, Germany? But it's the case. So it's the Kunstakademie there. And Beuys was teaching there, Richter was there. And for the purposes of our purposes today, the crucial thing is that around in the early 1970s, they appointed Bernd Becher, B-E-C-H-E-R, professor of photography. And Becher had been making remarkable photographs since around 1960.